Hello, my name is Raquel Alonso Pedrero, and I'm a PhD student at the Department of Industrial Economics and Technology Management at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Today, I will be presenting my work about the interactions between energy local communities and retail electric providers, focusing on the effect on balancing cost under different tariff designs. Traditionally, the electricity system has been designed assuming one-way direction from the point of generation, usually produced by large capacity generators, to the point of consumption, that can be connected to the distribution or the transmission lines. However, the commitment to meet environmental goals has pushed forward the need of high shares of renewable energy sources. As a result, the power system has entered into a new era in which end users at the distribution level can invest and install distributed energy sources. Some examples of possible distribution assets are generation technologies such as PV panels, storage technologies that range from EVs, stationary batteries, or thermal storage, as well as devices or appliances which can be controlled to regulate the demand and meet the new generation profiles. The introduction of these assets has brought benefits at the individual level, as prosumers, which are consumers that also produce their own electricity, could reduce their dependency from the main grid. However, prosumers tend to invest not in the maximum capacity potential, but just on the capacity that is required to cover their personal needs, with the consequence of losing some potential for reinstallation. Moreover, the incentives of installing these devices were not so strong, as end users could not clearly perceive the benefits of their installation. As a solution to this and some other issues, energy communities have been proposed. These are groups of consumers and prosumers who join together to achieve social, environmental, or economic goals by sharing or trading their individual resources. Within communities of residential users, the assets are operated according to a defined market structure, which can be cooperative or non-cooperative, depending on the selected design. Although some of them are focused on working in island mode to be disconnected from the main grid, most of them still depend on the supply from retailers. For example, this will occur when the local generation within the community is not enough to cover the demand of all the members. Energy retailers, since the liberalization of the European electricity market, have been the intermediaries between end users and wholesale markets. Basically, these agents were responsible of purchasing appropriate volumes of power in the markets and deliver it to their customers. To do so, retailers always needed to forecast the standard load profiles of all their customers. This has been a relatively easy task, as the behavior of customers based on certain parameters have been known. However, the integration of distributed energy resources will challenge the accuracy of load prediction algorithms, as their operations at the local level depends on personal preferences of prosumers or particular designs of energy communities. This issue becomes more noticeable if we adopt these neighborhoods, which also exchange power from peer-to-peer or activate flexibility according to the needs of the whole neighborhood. Our hypothesis is that without collaboration, retailers might send wrong bids to the day-ahead markets, and they will not be able to correct these volumes in the intraday market. This will suppose higher deviations for TSOs to balance in the balancing market, and retailers will get penalized in the balance settlement process. In other words, retailers will incur in additional costs due to the inability to predict the real load of their customers in energy communities. Before proceeding with the problem description, let me give a brief introduction to the balancing system. This system consists of 3 stages according to delivery time. The first stage is known as the balancing planning. During this stage, retailers participate in the day-ahead and intraday market to purchase or sell power in order to end up having appropriate volumes to cover the demand of their customers. This stage finalizes some minutes before delivery time, when the retailers send their final positions to the transmission system operators, also known as TSOs. After that, in the balancing service provision, TSOs are responsible of activating the required reserves to balance the mismatch between these final positions and the real needs of the system. This difference at the individual level is known as the imbalance volume, while the sum of all imbalance volumes of all market participants is referred as the system imbalance. Finally, after the delivery, an imbalance price is calculated according to the incurred cost for the TSO and the system balance sign. This price is charged to retailers and producers to penalize them from deviating from their commitments. In Europe, it was accepted the adoption of what is called the single price mechanism, which basically defines the same price for surplus and deficit imbalances. This way of pricing imbalances is considered an efficient way to recover all balancing costs for TSOs, but also promotes arbitrage behaviors in market participants to provide what is referred as passive balancing. This concept basically means that market participants provide balancing services to TSOs through their own imbalance volumes. For example, if a retailer has surplus deviations and the system imbalance is on deficits, this particular retailer is not deteriorating the system position, but instead is helping it to be balanced, and therefore it's rewarded for it. The reason why this behavior is systematically induced is what is called the imbalance price spread, which is the difference between the imbalance price and the wholesale price. Whenever the imbalance price is positive, market participants will aim to be in a surplus position, as the obtained revenues through the imbalance price is higher than the costs incurred in the wholesale markets. The opposite situation will occur when the imbalance price is negative. Now that we know the context, we can define the problem we aim to study. Basically, we can hypothesize that energy communities will affect the financial outcomes of retailers by affecting their deviations. This type of effects on other market participants is not accepted by European regulations, and therefore, it might suppose a barrier for the adoption of energy communities. With this study, we aim to improve our understanding of the real interaction between these two agents, and we propose a collaboration strategy to reduce any issue cost in the retailers. We propose a novel framework that combines 3 stages. The first one uses a stochastic linear optimization to model a retailer's position in the day-ahead market, whose objective is to cover the demand of each individual member of a community. It is assumed that, first, the retailer has a deliberate goal to provide passive balancing services to TSOs, and second, that the retailer has no information about the operational decisions at the local level. Then, the second step involves modeling the operational decisions of an energy community who adopts a peer-to-peer transaction and storage technologies, and whose members are subscribed to the retailer modeled in the previous stage. Also in this stage, we assume perfect information of local generation load profiles and retailer price. Finally, we calculate the imbalance cost exposed to understand the financial outcomes of the retailer. Additionally, we investigate the adoption of this collaboration strategy, assuming that the retailer has perfect information of what occurs at the local level, so that it can bid with perfect accuracy in the day-ahead market and minimize its deviations. In this way, we quantify an upper threshold of the benefits of adopting data exchange mechanisms between the energy community and a retailer. In the rest of the presentation, we will first explain the methods used in the study. We will first present the retailer commitment model and thereafter the community model. We also present the details of our case study in London and conclude with our results and the final remarks. In the retailer commitment stochastic model, the objective is to maximize the expected profits from offering passive balancing services to the TSOs, which is calculated using the imbalance price spread, lambda. We assume that the retailer has perfect information of both the wholesale and the imbalanced price, as in this way we neglect the effect of forecasting errors in the deviations of the retailer. Also, the expected profit will depend, of course, on the expected deviations, which can be positive when the retailer has surplus or negative when the retailer has deficits. For each scenario of the stochastic model, the incurred deviations will depend on the final position in the day-ahead market and the forecasted net load assumed by the retailer. Notice that here we use net load of individual members as we assume that the retailer has knowledge of self-consumption. Also, we assume that the final commitment sent in the balancing planning phase is equal to the day-ahead bid. This last assumption means that the retailer does not participate in the intraday market as it has no information about how much volume is actually required to be balanced. Then, in equation 2, we force the day-ahead bid to be within the maximum and minimum total net load of all the scenarios. This equation is required to make the problem feasible, as arbitrage opportunities implies the model choosing infinite volumes to maximize profit. Also, these assumptions make the model more realistic as, in theory, retailers should not exploit in a large degree the arbitrage opportunities. Then, we have the community model that decides separations of the distribution generation assets in a cooperative way, with the objective of minimizing the cost for the whole community. Here, we assume that the community has perfect information of the parameters, but as we do not know the real generation scenario, we assume that it belongs to the set omega used also in the retailer's model. The total operational cost of the community will be the result of multiplying the retailer price and the inputs from the grid. This retail price will depend on the tariff subscription agreed with the retailer. For example, it can be a flat rate tariff or a real-time tariff. The problem is subject to a balance equation at each node that implies that the supply at each node should be higher than the demand. On one hand, the supply can come from the main grid, the renewable generation at that node, the discharge of batteries and EVs, and the import from other houses. On the other hand, the demand is formed by the load, the charging of batteries and EVs, and the exports to other members of the community. The first set of constraints additional to the balance equation models the peer-to-peer trading within the community. This set of equations makes sure that there's a balance of power within the community and at each node. Notice that the exports and imports are between members of the community and there's no injection into the main grid. Also, we account for the losses of distributing the power from household to household. The second set of constraints corresponds to the battery modeling. Here, we model the behaviors of each battery connected to the households that own this kind of technology. Apart from modeling the state of charge and the discharge and discharge volumes, we also impose a condition that at the beginning of each day, all batteries should be charged at a certain level to not compromise the decisions of the next day. Apart from stationary batteries, we also model electric vehicles. These storage technologies have similar characteristics to batteries. However, we need to account whenever they are not connected to the community grid, as well as the possible storage levels when they arrive to the corresponding node. Moreover, to account for optimal initial state of charge in each day, we run the model in a rolling horizon fashion. This basically involves running the model for each day, let's say day 1, with an extended time horizon until day 2, just before the first departure time of the EVs. Then, the initial state in the run for day 2 is said to be the one calculated in the previous run for day 1. Here, I will rapidly present our case study. We apply our framework to an energy community of 50 households whose members are considered affluent or comfortable, depending on their total consumption throughout the year. The data was gathered from the Low Carbon London project and is based on measured data. The households in the community incorporate wind turbines, PV panels, batteries, or EVs according to the table on the right. For the scenario generation of the local production, we used an ARMA model, while the EV behaviors were retrieved from an algorithm developed by Laxhammond and Bierhoff. Based on the storage technologies incorporated and the tariff subscription, we defined 6 different cases. The first 2 correspond to the baseline cases, where we assume a business-as-usual scenario where there's no community nor storage technologies. Thus, the retailer just needs to supply the needs of individual consumers and prosumers. The difference between them is the tariff subscriptions, which can be flat or a real-time tariff, following the day-ahead prices. Notice that these tariffs have been adapted so that the mean yearly average price is the same in both tariffs, as shown in the figure. Then, we have the home VAT and the EV cases, which differ only on the type of storage technologies, but both incorporate peer-to-peer transactions. Like the baseline case, we create a case for each type of subscription. Now, let's move to the final part of the presentation, which is the analysis of the results and the final remarks. In this figure, we show the surplus and deficits of the retailer for a whole year in each case. In blue, we have the volumes of surplus deviations, while in red, the deficits. Analyzing the case with the stationary batteries, we appreciate that, as expected, they mainly generate surplus for the retailer. This is expected as batteries will only serve the community to make sure that excess local production is available at other times of the day. When the community is subscribed to real-time tariffs, there might be some exploitation of prices. However, it will depend on the capacity available after using the extra local resources. A different outcome can be expected from EVs. Basically, these technologies do not only act as flexible sources, but also they add demand to the community. This implies that mostly create deficits in retailers. Although the figure shows also high levels of surplus, these are mainly created by the peer-to-peer transactions occurring in that case. Comparing both technologies, we also can observe that the deviations caused by EVs are larger than those from stationary batteries. But how do these deviations translate into passive balancing and imbalances? Well, in the case of the baseline, we of course obtain 100% of passive balancing as the retailer model is aligned with the business-as-usual scenario. It contains perfect information of the balanced price, and we are analyzing the expected scenario of local generation. Then, the surplus generated by stationary batteries provided around 50% of passive balancing, independently on the tariff. There's no noticeable difference between tariffs, as the batteries were not sensitive to price variations. Then, in the EV case, we see that the passive balancing rates are slightly decreased. However, it's not a significant change compared to the home or the stationary batteries. In general, we can see that there is a weak temporal correlation between the reaction of the energy communities using real-time tariffs and the balancing needs in the system, which implies that this type of tariff will not be the most suitable for retailers to avoid uncertainty of penalizations for deviating. In this slide, we present the final economic result of the retailer for each case compared to the expected profit. I will not go through the whole table in detail, but just mention what is mostly relevant. While stationary batteries affect mostly on the revenues from the payments done by the community, that means what is paid by the community to import from the grid, EVs have to stabilize these revenues. Therefore, the result is that stationary batteries worsen the profit while EVs helps to stabilize it. To finalize the results section, here we show the economic outcomes from integrating collaboration strategies between the retailer and the community. Basically, the effect is that the retailer perfectly fits in the day-ahead market, and at the end, there's no deviation in the imbalance settlement process. Remember that the results of these profits are just an upper threshold, as perfect information is not realistic. Briefly, the retailer does not obtain major benefits by incorporating collaboration strategies, as the difference with the non-collaborative scenario is minimal. This implies that the revenues obtained from the single imbalance price are significantly helping the retailer in the absence of accurate forecast of the real consumption of the community. Despite the lack of benefit for the retailer, collaboration will enhance the deviations for the system and decrease the need for activating reserves. Our first conclusion is that depending on the storage technology installed in the energy community, the sign and volume of the deviations of retailers will be highly affected. Also, the different storage technologies, depending on their relations with the local generation, will be more or less sensitive to the tariff subscription contracted. Also, as mentioned before, price signals based on day-ahead volatility does not imply providing more passive balancing. In other words, these dynamic signals have a low correlation with the system needs. Also, although the retailer does not seem to gain from collaboration, we can extend our work to risk aversion scenarios where retailers without perfect forecast of imbalance prices might be willing to avoid deviations and to not incur in extra cost. Also, we have to mention that collaboration can also benefit other parts of the system such as the TSOs and also the energy communities, who can sell their information. Finally, we claim to rethink the political discussion about extending balancing responsibilities to energy community. By implementing this type of responsibility to end users, the adoption of energy communities can be compromised, which in turn will affect the integration of clean technologies and the decarbonization of the system. Also, establishing collaboration might not lead to major benefits for retailers, but neither to substantial costs. Here I added some references and related literature that might be interesting for those of you who are interested in the topic. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be very glad to answer any question.